Many of you, I'd put that maybe around 50, probably had no idea who that was. Many of you know exactly who that is and are questioning why I would bring him into church. He is a polarizing character. He is, I think, a great way to describe him was he was a lover of opulence. He is someone who had everything you can imagine. If you're not familiar with who Liberace is, Liberace, as you know, was his last name, was also his stage name, was a very famous pianist, especially in the 50s, 60s, and waning in the 70s. He was known for his flamboyance. He is basically one of the original Vegas acts. Today, people flock to Las Vegas to experience the lavish shows, and he was one of the first and original ones. He fit in so well with his lavish robes, driving cars on stage, and he played piano, and he touched the lives of many, creating smiles for people. But ultimately, he lived his life in such a way, and you saw that he was seeking for pleasure. He sought after the things that would make him smile and that would make him happy. Think about it. His bedroom was too boring, so he decided to hire a descendant of Michelangelo to paint a terrible replica of the Sistine Chapel. Why? Because he could. He lived his life by the motto that if there is a blank space anywhere, it should be filled. Can you imagine what that would be like? To fill every little aspect of your life with something. To have something that would bring you pleasure. That would bring you some sort of form of joy. I mean, look at it. His car was too boring for him, so he had to put crystals all over it, right? I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. It's kind of crazy. Many of you have no idea who that is, but many of you know exactly who that is. He lived his life by seeking out pleasure. And ultimately, what did it get him? Most of you under 50 have no idea who that was. Solomon is writing this book called Ecclesiastes in our Bible that we have. And we're going to be looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 2 today. And he's striving and searching for just this one question that he's trying to answer, which is, what is the meaning of life? You know, light stuff. He's seeking and searching to find what it is and why life exists and what is the purpose of it. Last week we looked and he tried on education and knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And ultimately he sees it, emptiness is what it led him to. He studied everything he could study. He sought out everything. He read every book possibly imaginable, only to find that it was meaningless. So now he's moved on to pleasure. Now we know pleasure very well in our day and age and in our society. In fact, we live oftentimes by a motto that teaches us the pursuit of pleasure is the most important goal in life. I mean, just think about commercials. I love commercials because I feel like they are microcosms of what our life is looking at and what they try to sell and what they try to create in us. You see, it really comes down to something called hedonism. Hedonism is a philosophy that goes all the way back to Aristippus of Cyrene, who was a student of Socrates. And Aristippus came out with this whole idea that the most important goal in life is to please oneself. People have the right to do everything in their power to achieve the greatest amount of pleasure possible, surpassing their amount of pain. And just think about that. People are seeking out anything and everything that will give them pleasure to balance out the amount of pain that they are in. Doesn't that tell us exactly what life looks like? What everyone is telling us, what we're being sold on a daily basis? And that if we're in pain, that we need to find something to bring pleasure to balance out and cancel out that amount of pain. And so as long as we're living our life to seek as much pleasure as possible, and it cancels out the amount of pain, then we're doing something right. Think about the people who are popular today. That's basically what Oprah uses her platform for and what she teaches. One of the things I find fascinating is the culture surrounding the network called Comedy Central. I don't know if you're familiar with it. If you've never, don't bother watching it. It's really just mostly filth that's on there. But one of the things you see is that you see these stand-up comedians. And these stand-up comedians, what they do is they are deeply scarred and damaged individuals. They have horrific personal lives. And what they try to do is they try to cover up their pain by making others laugh. But ultimately, there is a high rate of drug abuse and suicide in this culture that's dominated by trying to make people laugh. We were shocked a couple of years ago when we found out Robin Williams took his life. He made so many people laugh and he touched so many, yet ultimately, how could it be possible the person that could bring so much joy, who could bring so much laughter, because he helped us get through all these difficult times in our lives, how could he all of a sudden take his because he couldn't deal with the pain of life, the depression that comes and crushes us? You see, Solomon understood all this, and Solomon seeks out to find out all these things. He was the wealthiest man on earth, and he had the means to do everything. There was nothing that could stop him, no limits that would possibly keep him from experiencing pleasure. So the wealthiest man on the earth has been searching for the meaning of life, and he's tried everything. And now he's going to try pleasure. So follow along with me as I read from Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 1. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? And I searched with all my heart and cheer, and my body with wine. My heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how I lay hold of folly, till I might see what was good for children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses. I planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks. I planted them with all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to the water in the forest and growing trees. I brought male and female slaves, and I had slaves who were born in my house. I also had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and treasure of the kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines to delight in of the children of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem, and also my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my eyes found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for my toil. I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended doing it. And behold, all was vanity, and a striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. It was all just striving after the wind, chasing after the wind. All this time he spent chasing after pleasure. And ultimately it leads to vanity. It leads to emptiness. But that's not what the world teaches. The world teaches us about seeking out pleasure. It's about finding everything. And so Solomon tries everything. He starts with laughter. I can imagine, right? If you're the richest man in the world, you have the ability to do anything. You could hire as many comedians as you want. You could hand pick and hand choose the funniest, the best, the ones that have the biggest following, and bring them into your own for personal shows. All of this you have. But one of the things that Solomon realizes is that it is emptiness. You see, the thing about laughter is that laughter is a beautiful thing. Laughter is this great thing. It's been created by God, and it's good for us to have. You know, this past week we had a funeral, and it's hard, and it's really a hard funeral to fathom and kind of deal with, because it was a young man. And it's never easy watching a parent bury a kid, no matter how old that parent is. And so here we're watching, and as I'm experiencing the things of this funeral and going through and I see this, it's one of these things where the overwhelming weight of everything that you're going through, it almost seems inappropriate to laugh. But as you're dealing with the pain and the hurt and remembering the life of a wonderful individual, we begin to laugh at the silly things that he did. He was a prankster. That's what he loved to do. And it brings that temporary relief to the pain that we're in. And so why wouldn't we use that? We use jokes. You know, it's amazing to me. Netflix. Netflix is a basically, for lack of better words, it's a television network. You subscribe to it. It's online. You stream everything. The two most watched shows on Netflix are reruns of two sitcoms. The TV show Friends and the TV show The Office. And we laugh at them. Why is it? Because we look for relief. It's by no mistake, as I was a kid, I remember that still during, before there was cable and we had I still had the dial switching TV and everything like that, they had reruns of MASH on forever. We watch these shows because they make us laugh. They bring us joy. It gives us this temporary escape from the hurt and the pain that we feel. But that's the thing, right? It's temporary. It doesn't last. And Solomon realizes it. He sees this. He sees this depressing weight of everything, and he realizes that humor is great and all, but it does not last. It has no lasting power, and so as a result, it's meaningless to answer the question that he has. The meaning of life is not to laugh. So he goes on to wine. Now, let's be honest. If you're the richest person in the world, I imagine that you're not drinking wine out of a box, right? I imagine you're sitting there like he's probably got his little cup and he's swirling it around going, oh, the tannins and letting it breathe and all these other things that I don't understand, right? And so he's very clear. Solomon's like, look, I understand drunkenness is a reason. I kept my heart about me. I kept my wits. I didn't get drunk and everything. I kind of question that a little bit, but whatever. That's what the scripture says. I'm going to trust it. So here is what he's saying. So he tries everything. So he tries the finest flavors that he can find. And he finds this. And if you've ever met someone who's in the wine crowd before, they just will talk about it for hours. It's amazing. They'll sit there and they'll talk about notes of this and flavors of that and this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, it's all grape juice when it's fermented, right? That's all what it comes down to. I don't know. I think Welch's had it right, But here's the thing. This is what they do. They talk about it. And so he goes into this whole crowd and he finds and he seeks and he searches. And he realizes that doesn't really do him any good. One of the most fascinating things is when you watch a beer commercial. And I think they have some incredibly bright people making beer commercials. In fact, I look forward to seeing them during the Super Bowl. I'm not going to lie to you. You notice how no one is ever having a bad time? You notice that everybody is always just having the time of their life. That everybody is just enjoying themselves and this seeking out of pleasure, and no one ever has a bad time. It's all just great. It's all wonderful things that happen. You're sitting on a beach drinking something. You're over here having a party. Everybody's smiling and laughing and dancing. It's great. Solomon experienced all that. But he realized the emptiness that it brought. Because ultimately the party ends. Ultimately, the bottle is empty. Ultimately, everything that you could possibly experience and the pleasure that it brings, because it does bring pleasure. But the pleasure ultimately comes up short and leaves him empty. So it's meaningless. So then he goes on, he goes, all right, I've tried humor, I've tried wine, let me try building things. Now, it amazes me what an industry has been created around building homes. Now, you all know what I'm talking about. There are multiple different television networks dedicated to what you could do to your home. And Solomon talks about this, right? He builds gardens. He goes, you know what? We need a water feature over here. So he builds the finest water features that you can possibly imagine. One of the most incredible things is that Solomon has the right to build the temple for God. The physical dwelling place on earth for the presence of God in the Old Testament was the temple. If you want to read something fascinating, or if you're looking for something to put yourself to sleep, read the description of the building of the temple. It is amazingly ornate in detail as far as the painstaking things that go into the creation of the temple and the building of it. And it takes 7 years. The man who has unlimited resources takes 7 years to build the finest building that the world has ever known, to house the presence of the one true God. And you know what he does then? He turns around and spends 13 years building his own house. He spends twice the amount of time. Now, I read the description of the temple. I read some archaeological stuff about what Solomon's palace would look like, but it must have been amazing. I mean, gold was so abundant in Solomon's world that they basically were like, we don't really need silver. Don't bother bringing it. Can you imagine that? We don't really need silver. It's all about gold. Gold's much more valuable. We have plenty of silver. We don't need any more. I mean, think about that, right? You're so rich and you have all this opulence. And so he goes and he builds and he creates these beautiful houses. He has houses, and you know what? He says, I like this style, so he builds another house over here, and he builds another house over here. He has all these buildings and everything, and he finds out that they come up short, and it's meaningless. Then he talks about owning things, talks about slaves. Now, one of the things we need to understand is slavery in the Old Testament does not look like slavery that we know in America. But with that said, there was ownership of people. He had things. He had people. He had people. He had people for people for people. And he owned things. He went out and bought slaves because maybe that would bring him a great amount of joy owning people. And it didn't. He realized it had come down short. You know, I was thinking about trying to make this understandable for us nowadays because we don't really own people. So this is what I came up to. You wake up in the morning, and maybe, like many people in the United States, you get out the door and maybe you stop for breakfast somewhere. Someone has made your food. Maybe you have to stop and get your cup of Starbucks coffee, or maybe if you're lucky enough to live close to Dunkin' Donuts, yeah, right. Someone has spent time making your coffee. Just think about it, right? Like, you paid someone to make you a drink. You have people for that. Maybe you work someplace and you have a secretary. Maybe your secretary has a secretary. Maybe you have people who are under you. You've got people, and people can do your job. You know what? If you don't like cutting your grass, you can get a person for that. Now, we don't own them by any stretch of the imagination, but it's one of those things, how great it is when you could go out into your backyard and you can just look at how wonderful it is and how great it looks, and you didn't do a thing. There's no weeds. There's no bare spots from where the dog dug up stuff. It looks amazing. It looks pristine. The trees are all trimmed properly. You're getting yard of the month from your HOA. Like, how great is it, right? All those people who win yard of the month from the HOA, I guarantee you, they all have multiple people doing things to their yard and their houses outside. I'm just saying that. They got people for that. We have people for that. We hire people to do our things. We hire people. We don't want to clean our chimney? Great. We hire a person for that. We don't want to deal with cleaning up the horrible messes of life? We can hire someone to do that. Housekeepers. And the more money you have, the more ability you can have, and the more freedom and time that you can free up so you don't have to bother doing chores. We have people. Solomon went that route and had people serve him and do everything for him. And ultimately, it was meaningless. He had food, he had flocks, he had all these things to his thing. One of the fascinating things, if you want to think about this, is that he had musicians. Music is such an important thing in our lives. Music is so meaningful. We think about songs, and songs, the way they bring back memories. One of the most fascinating things, if you ever walk into an Alzheimer's unit, and you hit a song gets played, the flooding of emotions that come back over a person is absolutely amazing. They're ingrained in our lives. Some of the most impactful and important moments of our life we remember because of music. Imagine if you have your little device and you have it hooked up to your headphones, you get to listen to the songs that you love. What if you could have the band? Like you just had a band on retainer, right? And you're just like, I really like this band, and I'm just going to have them come in. Maybe you want an opera singer, so you just hire them, you have them on retainer. And they're only for you. The music that they make is primarily just for you, and no one else can have it. Solomon goes through all these things to seek pleasure. He goes after women. Think about it. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines, which are basically just women that you're not married to, but they treat him as a wife. First of all, that sounds like a lot of headache, because that's a lot of women. He's supposed to be the wisest man in the world, right? I don't know. It's not the way God created it. God created it to be happiness in a relationship between a man and a woman, and it was this beautiful thing that he created called marriage. And here Solomon tries women, and he tries all sorts. He does everything to his heart's content, and he fills himself with this passion. And you know what? This is the world teaches us every single day. It's teaching your kids this. It amazes me how much so it's finding its way into cartoons about having relationships. It's all about the relationship and how it dictates that. And if you're in a relationship, then it'll make you feel great because you have this relationship, and it's going to make you feel great. And you know what the fact of the matter is that it's also the same thing for women. It's not just a man thing. These relationships that we have. Solomon had 1,000 women at his disposal. He objectified them. Is it any different than us in the pornography industry? It's not. In fact, you could have more than 1,000 women just at a click away. The fact of the matter is that he tried sexual pleasure, and it ultimately left him empty. And the world preaches it so strongly as it's the end-all and the be-all. One of the most fascinating statistics I find that just blows me away is that Barnes & Noble was about to file for bankruptcy, and then someone wrote a terrible book called 50 Shades of Grey. And ultimately, if you know what I'm talking about, otherwise don't worry about it, it saved them from bankruptcy. And the content of the book is about a tryst and nothing more than that. The fact of the matter is that we hear about this and we think that something is always better, and if we could just obtain this pleasure and everything would just mean so much more, and we would have this ability just to have this. And that's what the world preaches, right? James Bond has been around for 25 movies, not because it's a fun, neat thing to watch with your kids. It's about the fact that it was what every man dreamed of being, and that was the attraction to it. He had power and fame. Verse 9, I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem, and all my wisdom remained with me. Think about that. He was greater than any person in the greatest nation in the world. Everyone knew him. Everyone experienced it. Everybody wanted to be him. He was Solomon. He had everything you could possibly imagine. And Solomon tries everything. And ultimately, he finds emptiness and meaningless in life. We seek out fame. We seek out power. We think about social media and how we love to put out the best images of ourselves, and we strive and long to be like the best images that we see of each other, when ultimately deep down inside we see our worlds are crumbling and falling apart. And Solomon concludes seeking after pleasure with this. Verse 11, and then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil that I had experienced doing. And behold, it was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. You know, so often we think only if I could just win the lottery, I'd just have a little bit more money, I'd be able to do this and I'd be happy. Only if I had this relationship, I could just be happy. Only if I could just have this or just have that, the house that I've always wanted, these things that I've always wanted. If I could just get them, then I have that happiness, and then that would just complete me. But ultimately, it's going to leave you empty. There is nothing of value under the sun. Can you imagine a commercial trying to have an ad for that? Buy this product. It's worth nothing. It wouldn't work, right? Instead, the promise is there trying to tell you to get this, to grasp it, to reach out for it, to get it, but ultimately it's meaningless. And this is what Solomon finds and understands, because he has the resources to try everything. And he finds it's nothing more than trying to find the meaning of life by seeking after the things that please our flesh, the things that please our souls, these things that we please, that we find, the temporary comforts, are ultimately like chasing after the wind. By trying to grab and hold onto air. So what do we do with this? You know, my daughter was watching a TV show the other day. It was this cute show about dancing and ballet and stuff like that. And this girl is supposed to be dancing, and she gets these magical shoes. I don't really know. It's wasted on me, right? And all I remember is this running joke I have with her, because always the ballet instructor gives you these special shoes, and it's supposed to make her dance, and then she loses the shoes, and she goes, "Oh no!" And the instructor goes to her like the shoes were meaningless, and touches her chest like this, and he goes, "It's inside here. It's in your heart. Just trust your heart." And of course, she dances beautifully, and she gets the part, and it's the end of the show and everything. But think about that trust your heart. And that's what we're told. Just find that pleasure in your heart. Whatever pleases you, whatever will make you feel good, do it, because that's what you need. So after the show was over, I said to my daughter, I said, "Hey, you remember this Bible verse that we talked about? It's Jeremiah 17:9. It says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it?" Let me read that again if you didn't catch that. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? The fact is that our heart is desperately sick because we are sinners and we are marred by sin. And because we are marred by sin, we seek after the things that are going to make our heart feel good. But ultimately, our heart is sick and deceitful and will trick us into thinking that pleasure is everything that we need in life. Liberace was tricked, and he fell hook, line, and sinker. I mean, everything that you saw was amazing in that video, and gaudy and plainly from my standpoint, tastes pretty ugly, right? But he thought he had everything, and he continued to try to fill it, to find some sort of meaning and pleasure. And ultimately, that quest is going to leave us empty, because our heart is deceitful and deceives us into thinking that these things are worthwhile. Galatians 5:19. Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalry, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Seeking pleasure puts us at odds with God. Because ultimately, what happens is that our heart tries to deceive us and make it out to the only thing that we could possibly seek, versus finding the peace and joy that comes from having a relationship with Jesus Christ. Solomon had it right. There is nothing of worth under the sun. The problem is that the one thing that does bring meaning is not under the sun. In fact, it's great news. The one thing that brings us joy and brings us meaning is above the sun. In fact, it's the creator of the sun. It is the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. It is the peace in knowing that we can have the world falling apart at our ends, and we continue to seek the things that we desire and hold, but ultimately they're going to leave us empty and just moving on to the next thing. It is Jesus Christ that will ultimately quench that thirst in our souls. That ultimately that we will find meaning and find purpose. We can spend our whole lives chasing after things, but ultimately it'll leave us empty. When we chase after God, we will find completion and we will find wholeness. If you have never trusted Jesus Christ with your heart, if you have never said, you know what, I am willing to give him a try, I want to encourage you to do so. And what you will see is you will find a creator who not only gives you purpose and meaning, but also will love you in spite of all your failures. At this time, we're going to close. We're going to close in a song. And one of the things I want to invite you to do is I want you to respond and react. Maybe you realize that there's something that has gotten in the way and that you've been chasing after and that you need forgiveness from. You can come down and you can pray with me. Maybe you need to just go and deal with it by yourself, and maybe the act of coming forward and leaving it here is a good way, and come and pray about it. You can stay in your seat if you need to, but one of the things I want to encourage you is don't just leave it at that. Continue to strive. Continue to search. And what you'll find is the goodness of Jesus Christ.